All right, welcome to the WA Lecture Series, Episode 6. If you have already seen this, it's because there was some unfortunate issues with the first one. So I am going to redo it. Actually, let me turn my mic up just a bit here. Okay. So the purpose of this lecture is hopefully to give people a nice overview of how to make a StarCraft Brood War custom map. Specifically, I'm going to be going over a map that I have made called Æsir Special Forces that I started, I think, something like 6 months ago. I put quite a substantial amount of work into it. It's in a pretty playable state. I'm still adding, small additions to it, just kind of additional content and that kind of thing. But it's seen probably a half dozen-ish playtests. A lot of bugs have been fixed and ironed out. So yeah, I'm going to kind of show you guys around that map and the map editor I use, and hopefully it will be beneficial for anyone who is curious about StarCraft Brood War map making. So first things first, let's talk about what you need in order to make maps. Well, ideally, for one, you need StarCraft Brood War here. So this is just after you start StarCraft Brood War. This is what you're going to see. It's free. You do need Battle.net, the Battle.net game client. That's how you play Overwatch, World of Warcraft, StarCraft 2, Diablo, all that stuff. But you can get it for free. Now, you can get StarCraft Remastered, which has the remastered graphics and such. That costs money. Personally, I don't really care for it because I played the original StarCraft so long. I don't really care about the graphics. I find them kind of charming. But if you want to get remastered, I guess you can. But regular StarCraft is totally free. There is one issue, though. StarCraft custom maps, which were the heart and soul of original StarCraft. They are made using a map editor. Which map editor? Well, let's see. Should be map editor here. Oh, wait, no. Blizzard removed the entire thing. For some reason, they decided with the remastered that they would remaster the map editor into non-existence. So it is gone. It's in the garbage bin. No way to find it here. Thanks, Blizzard. So, with that in mind, okay, you've got StarCraft Brood War, but then what can you do? Well, you can multiplayer. You can open up Battle.net. You can play games online. You can also do single player, play through the campaign. You can play custom maps either on Battle.net. Your client will automatically download the maps when you join a game, or you can play them by yourself in single player, perhaps to test them or something like that. Some maps are totally fully playable single player, and it's fun. So the question becomes, how do you actually make a map then? Well, here's what you do. You need a program such as this one. In fact, probably definitely this one. This is SCM Draft 2.0, which is a StarCraft map editor. It is a third-party tool, not made by Blizzard, which allows you to create your own maps and edit them and edit other people's maps, assuming they have not been edited with some special software that makes it impossible for anyone to open them, which some people do, and that's a lot of fun. But we're not going to get into that. So SCM Draft 2.0, where do you get it? Well, just look it up on Google. I think you can download it from Stormcoast Fortress or SourceForge or one of those websites or something like that. It's a great program. Back in the day, there were a lot of different map editors that you could use. You could use the base StarCraft map editor. You could use SCM Draft. By base editor, I mean the one that came with the game, back when it came with the game. You can also, there's one called StarCraft Extra Editor that I used a fair bit, which was kind of cool. It had like 6 different mini editors inside of it, which could each be used for different parts of map making. There's one called Star Edit, which was a lot of fun. Very, very complicated, detailed map maker, and generally was considered the best for making terrain, which is really what you're seeing visually here. These cliffs, the dirt, the runes, the magma, all this different stuff. This is terrain. Star Edit was well known for being great with terrain, but the truth is the SCM Draft 2 is fantastic with it as well. But now, where are all these editors? Well, I already told you that Blizzard's prepackaged editor is gone. And I haven't been able to find StarCraft Extra Editor or Star Edit. So to my knowledge, SCM Draft 2 is really the only remaining logical choice whatsoever. So you will need this. So you have StarCraft Brood War for free, SCM Draft 2, of course, also free. You download that, and you can get started making your map. Okay, so to start with, let's take a look around SCM Draft 2.0. So it's a pretty standard kind of old school style interface. There's kind of a few things you want to look at here. So we'll start with pretty simple file. This is how you can open a map. You can save your map. Worth keeping in mind, you probably want to save your map on a specific spot. I save it on my Google Drive so I can open it up on any computer. I can look at it on my phone if I wanted to do that for some reason. You can also edit. You can copy and paste stuff. So let's say, oh, I like this Cerebrit. Let's Control-C that and Control-V. Oh, I can paste it somewhere. Cool. Copy, paste, pretty standard stuff. Select all. If you wanted to do that for some reason, select your whole map, delete everything. That would be not a great idea. Options. So this is really self-explanatory. It's options. And basically what this is just different things you can toggle. So for example, units and buildings snapping to a grid. So let's say I want to place a building right now. You see how it just moves like one block at a time? Okay. Let's try buildings not slapping to the tile. Whoa, I can put it anywhere. But you do want to be a little bit careful. And kind of the same thing with this. So let's see. Place buildings anywhere is triggered. Now let's uncatch it. See, you see how it's red? Oh, it's green there. So I can put it here. But we can't put it anywhere else. Why is that? Well, it's because let's say you were playing this map and you brought your little SCV over here and tried to build a building here. It wouldn't let you. StarCraft doesn't let you place buildings over any terrain, only certain terrain, like the dirt here. So that's what that does. It allows you to override that and put it anywhere you want. Now, you can, because this would not be allowed here, and obviously I put it here. But you want to be a little bit careful, because sometimes you will place something. Let's do something weird. Let's do here, and let's do place buildings, or building snap to tile. Okay, let's do this. That looks weird, right? Yeah, if you try to load this, like play this map, what it's going to do is it's going to not place most of these. It's going to give you a bunch of errors and say, unit unplaceable, building unplaceable, building unplaceable, and give you the coordinates of where it is. If you do see that unit or building unplaceable, when you actually play the game, write down those coordinates, because it's actually important. So right here, you see how there's a coordinate down here in the bottom left? That's important. So that's actually telling you where you are on the map. So if you see an error of any kind when you're playing the game, look at the coordinate, and then that way you can open up your editor and find the coordinate. And there's a good chance you're going to look and know exactly what it's talking about. You're going to say, oh, that's that trigger at this spot. I know why. I know exactly what's going wrong there. So very useful. So that's kind of more or less what the options are. I mean, zoom, you can zoom in and out. Can be helpful if, for example, you want to see, this is about the view that a player will have when they are actually playing your map. So let's say you're here at the difficulty select. You want to make sure, this is where the map starts. You want to make sure the player can actually see the difficulty options here. This is for easy, this is for medium, this is for hard. And they have the little selector guy here. And they have to have the majority of the players, however many there are. If there's 3 players, then 2 of them have to go on the same one. 30 seconds pass and you can't make a decision, it auto sets it to medium. But it would be nice if the players can see all the beacons right from the start, instead of like having to scroll around and be like, where is easy, where's medium, is it over here? So can be nice to just kind of think about. And part of the reason for that is that this is a giant map. This is the biggest a map can be. It's 256 by 256. You can find that in here in scenario map dimensions. You can change it, but be careful changing it if you've already put stuff on the map, because it will delete things and can be very messy. That's kind of skipping ahead. So that's the zoom. I mean, most of this stuff is pretty standard. Doodads allow illegal placement. We'll get into that. That's As example, doodad is this little door thing in the cliff, you know, and normally it can only be placed in certain spots, but you can put it wherever you want. It's not really any issues with that. The only thing is that this looks natural if you restrict it to only place doodads where they're supposed to be. Let's give an example here. Kind of giving ahead. I was going to go over doodads later, but it just illustrates this setting a little bit easier. So here you see the yellow, it's saying, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. Green, it's saying, most of this is good. The top half is good, but the bottom half, I don't like that because there's magma in the way. It wants dirt. So let's find a place where we can put it. Right here, see? It likes that because there's dirt at the bottom, there's a cliff, perfect. So now I could put it anywhere I wanted. I could do that, right? But it looks a little odd. So that's what the illegal placement thing is all about. Not really anything else that we need to go over here. Enable sound. Basically, if you have... I recommend disabling this because it's really loud. But if you have this on... So if you have that on, and then you place a fire bat...
Fire it up. Yes.
So it's pretty loud. It plays little sound effects. It's kind of cool, but it gets old kind of fast when you're spending a lot of time on your map, so I recommend disabling it unless you really want to. Display options. Okay, display units, cloak units, you know, for example. So see, now it's cloaked units, so it can be easier to see the terrain underneath them, for example. Animate unit death, that just is what you just saw, where the fire bat exploded when I removed him. You can change it so it just straight up removes it normally. Really just visual stuff. Okay. Scenario. Now this is probably one of your most used areas. So I showed you map dimensions, right? So you can set dimensions for your map. Again, 256 by 256 is huge. It's the biggest it can be. Good for RPGs. Any kind of adventure thing like this is basically an RPG. But you might want something smaller if you want it to be easier to navigate. Keep in mind that if you have a trigger, like, for example, here, once they've selected a difficulty, it moves their guy over here to select a character, and it pans their camera, their screen, all the way over here. It actually takes about 5 seconds for it to move the camera over there because the map is so big. So that is a mild inconvenience and something to keep in mind. But the other thing is the base terrain here. So these are all different types, different tile sets, different terrain sets that you'll see in, for example, the single-player campaign and such. So depending on what kind of map you want it to be, I have this Ash World volcanic kind of looking one is what I've chosen. There's jungle, there's regular old school Badlands, there's installation where it looks like you're inside a space station. Lots of different options, but you're stuck with the one you pick. So you kind of want to keep or figure out what sort of theme you're going for here. So this one, it's kind of a Ragnarok, apocalyptic last stand against these demons. The volcanic setting is kind of dark and depressing and foreboding, but I kind of wanted that, you know, it's kind of the atmosphere. So think about the atmosphere and stuff like that when you're trying to figure out what you want to do there. Okay. Map properties. So this is pretty simple. What's the name of your map? So this is what will show up when you, for example, when you make a lobby for the game and people look over on the right side of the screen, it says what the name of the map is. That's what shows up here. The file name is what will show up when you're browsing through the maps that you own, trying to pick what map you want to play. So the file name is up here. That's what will happen when you save as. The map name is here. So very common if you're starting a new map, you're going to save it a bunch of times as something, and then you're going to open it up, and it's going to say Untitled Scenario is the name of it. And you're going to say, what? That's because you didn't change the map title. Okay, map description, same deal, shows up there. Basically, you can put whatever you want here. Basic description of what the map is. Demonic forces of Mick must have begun Ragnarok, blah, 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 blah. What the player colors are. That's just nice because in this map, up to 6 players can play. And it doesn't make a difference which player they are, if they're number 1 or number 4, except for what color they are. So this tells them what color they're going to be, depending on what position they are. So if they really want to be red, they can say, hey, can I be player 2? Whatever. Also says it's made by me. Because, sure, credit yourself. You put a lot of hard work into your map, you know? Okay, so, what about down here? Well, the race is going to matter not too much for most custom maps. This is something that really is going to matter, obviously, in regular StarCraft, because what race you're going to play determines what your whole starting building and units are and everything. The only way you can get access to other races is if you start as Protoss and you mind control somebody's drone or SCV. But in this case, actually, this really only affects the voices they hear when they upgrade or when their units are under attack and such, and the background music that they have, and the UI that they have. So it's sort of, there's a special UI border depending on what race you're playing in StarCraft Remastered, at the very least, I think. So very, very, very superficial differences here. But generally speaking, I want the players to feel like the good guys in this map, so I would say Terran or Protoss tends to fit a little bit more. Hey, maybe you want them to be Zerg and you think they're good guys still, that's fine. But personally, Terran, I think, gives kind of the human sort of feel a little bit. Color, again, does not matter at all. It just affects what color the units are going to be. Now, it is important, owner, human, or computer, because this is how many human players slots you want to have in your map. So player 7 is the ally of all the human players, so I want that to be a computer. And player 8 is the enemy of all the humans, and I want that to be a computer as well. Now, if you want this to be a PvP map, obviously, you're going to have multiple humans that are enemies of one another. But this is an RPG, cooperative RPG. Okay, forces. So you take all those. I just talked about player 1, human, whatever. This is where you line up the teams, basically. Now, you can set it up. You can make a trigger, which is basically, you know, the heart and soul of a custom map. I think I've said that about multiple things, but trigger is an important part of every custom map, are triggers. You can make a trigger that automatically makes these two teams allied. But right here, if you're on the same team, you can make them automatically allied. You don't have to do that, but in this case, I'm going to do it because this is a cooperative RPG. So you've got 6 players here. They're all allied. I have a trigger that sets them up to be allied with the Warriors of Æsir faction, and enemies with the Mikamus, the demon faction here, player 8. Okay? So pretty normal randomized start location. You basically never want to do unless you're making like a melee map or something like that. Of course, allied share vision, etc. You will have to make a trigger as well to share vision if you want to do that. I actually haven't done it for this map because player 7, their ally, has some stuff down here. This is kind of settings, behind the scenes stuff, and player 7 has some structures down here that do that. I'll explain them later. But for now, just know that I don't want the players to be able to see all this behind-the-scenes stuff. So that's why I can't have them have shared vision with player 7. So what's the solution? Well, these little things called map revealers. These give permanent vision in an area like this about for whoever I place one. So you can see I have map revealers here for all 6 players. I have them here. I have them here. I have them here. I have them here. So anywhere you want them. Really good, because I don't want them to be able to see player 7 or player 8. I want them to have to explore the map. So it should be totally dark as they explore it and find everything. So that's a good way to get around that. I also have a trigger that keeps a Protoss observer on top of the player's character all the time. That makes sure that they can see cloaked and burrowed units that are enemy or ally. But I don't have to make them actually have shared vision or anything. So that's nice. All right, where are we? We talked about forces, unit settings. This is a important thing. You're going to be doing this a lot. This is kind of often where people start, and where I've started if I have an idea for a map. Usually you start changing. Oh, you have Terran Goliath? I want to call it something else. I want to change the health. I want to change the armor. I want to change the damage values. I want to change how much minerals it costs to build it. I can want to change which players are allowed to build a Goliath. So you can do all that stuff in unit settings. You're basically just changing the default units. Use defaults is the thing that will do that. To your own custom names. And you can make a Firebat into a guy. You can make a... I can change this Tarask, this Ultralisk hero, into Commander the Black Saint, W.A. Einarjar. And I can change his health from whatever 800 or something the default is to almost 10,000. Small detail, anything above 9999 will not show as a number value in the game. And 99999, so one shy of 100,000, is the maximum health it can have. The disadvantage of giving a player something with the health of 100,000, they can't tell how much health they have. They only can look at the little diagram of their unit, and the more red it gets, the more damage they're getting. But they have no idea specifically how much health they have. That's why I like to make maps where people have less than 10,000 health, so they can see the number they're at and they can play a little bit more specifically around that. So I think that's a nice way to do it. But that's unit settings. Oh, one thing I'll show. So you see these little bracket caret things here and the numbers. These are colored text. These color the text. So 08 is a certain shade of red. 06 is a different shade of red. So I have the C as a bright red here, and then Amander, the, is a darker red, and then I have the B, bright red, lac is a darker red, etc. This is a little cool thing that usually impresses people. It's a way to make your map look a little bit more cool. Generally will look a little bit more finished. Will kind of look like you know what you're doing, actually. So yeah, that's just a small detail, something that you might want to add. Okay. One thing to keep in mind as well, I mentioned, for example, Zerglings, right? So you have all the stats of the Zergling and the name, but it's also being able to build it. Now, keep in mind, all the players, they have hives up here. Now, I have a trigger that kills their larva instantly, but let's say a player was hacking or doing something and they could instantly build something with their larva if they tried to. You have to keep in mind players are going to try to cheat your map and try to do weird stuff in it. So if you can stop it, if at all possible, you want to do that. So how can you do that? How can you make sure that they will never build anything with their larva, even if they split second try to build something? Well, availability. This is, are they allowed to build it? Default is disabled. And what do we have for the players? Default, 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 default. They can't build it. They're not allowed to. It won't even be there for them to click. So haha. Player 8, though, can build it. So what they are going to do is they have these layers and such, and they could build Zerglings if they wanted to. Because I have a trigger that actually has an AI running for this player. So this guy is a computer, but he's still actually going to play the game. So he's actually going to mine with his drones, and he's going to build Zerglings and Hydralisks and stuff. But I don't want him to be able to build anything. For example, let's look at the Ultralisk. The Ultralisk is Dark Wolf the Bold in Einarjar of WA. Do I want a billion Dark Wolves running around the map because the computer is building them? No. So I have the default here for player 8 disabled for everybody now. I think that about covers the unit settings, actually. So you'll notice if you open these up, you can still just page through them with these tabs here. So I'm going to do that. Upgrade settings. So this is pretty important. So for the, again, it's kind of the similar deal where you can have them disabled or not, or different starting levels and max levels for the upgrades for different players. So you can see here, infantry armor. I want the default here. Actually, Oh, that's why I didn't do that. I was wondering because technically player 8 does have Terran bosses and should not be able to upgrade that, but I realized player 8 doesn't have any Terran SCVs, it doesn't have any engineering bays, so player 8 doesn't actually have a way to upgrade it. That's why that doesn't matter. If I was being really careful, just in case, I would disable that for player 8 to make sure they can't do that. Player 7, same deal. But let's look at infantry weapons, because this is an interesting one. So normally, I have changed, make sure you have the base cost, by the way, in time and the upgrade factor as 0. That means it's an instant upgrade. If you don't, it starts taking a really long time to upgrade. It's a huge pain in the butt. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to want that in your map. But you can change the mineral and Vespane base costs and the upgrade, how much it adds on. So it's going to cost 2 for the first one, 4 for the next one, then 6, then 8, then 10, etc. Okay. So I have that as default, 0, 255. That's the max upgrade that you can have in a map. You can't go higher. So for players 1 through 6, default. Player 7, default is 0, max is 0. I don't want 7 to be able to upgrade. Now, actually, this is one, it doesn't matter, because player 7 doesn't have an engineering bay. They couldn't upgrade even if they wanted to, but again, better safe than sorry. If I accidentally put an engineering bay somewhere and forgot about it, okay, make sure they can't do it. How about player 8? They actually have some infantry, some Terran bosses that they get to use. So I actually have it set so they have 15 and 15. So their starting level's 15, but they're not allowed to upgrade it. Again, doesn't matter because they don't have any engineering bays, but just in case. So let's take a look at that. So, for example, one of the guys they have that use those is Infested Duran, who is a boss for Brander Manuling. Now, I don't want him to have any effect from the upgrades. So I just have his base damage as 1450, and he doesn't get anything from upgrades. So even though he's got 15 upgrades, it doesn't do anything, because I don't want it to. But let's switch it around, and let's look at Guy Montag. This is an Exile Pyro. It's just a regular unit. Doesn't have any upgrades. Okay. Let's look at Saint Sanctifico the Conqueror. Oh, now Sanctifico does have upgrades. And you think, well, of course, because he's a player unit. But there's actually what I call mimic demons, which are just spawning various player characters as regular enemies in the map is something that happens. And because the base damage for some of them is not high, actually it's supposed to be 195. I sometimes turn that up to use him to test out bosses. So I've caught that. So good thing. But yeah, so basically, if you look, let's find him here. So his base damage is only 195. That's not very high. What if we're real late in the game, and remember the max armor value, just like the weapon upgrade, you can have 255 upgrades. So a player could have 255 or more armor late in the game. So they're going to play against some Sanctifico enemies that don't even take any damage. 195, that's nothing. That's why I have the 15 upgrades, so that the enemy Sanctificos will actually do a little bit of damage. That's 15 times 14. It's whatever, 140 plus 50, 70, 360, something like 500 damage. So, or maybe not even that high, maybe like 400. But anyway, enough that they actually do damage to the player even with high armor, which I want, because it's supposed to be a dangerous enemy. Okay, so that's how upgrade settings work. Other than that, there's also different ones like, you know, for example, these different upgrades. You can look them up if you don't know what they do, but these all change like unit attack ranges, some of them, various things like that, vision ranges of certain units. Usually, I like to just have all these enabled, just in case, because most of the hero units will have these upgrades already. So if you're mixing and matching hero and base units, there's going to be a disconnect in terms of some of them don't have the upgrades and some of them do. I want them all to be equal footing. That's why I have most of these as the default. Also some stuff like that's just the base damage, but oh yeah, like this is faster Zergling movement and attack speed and such. I have all that stuff enabled. Tech settings, pretty similar to upgrade settings in that this is just, do you want it to be researched or disabled? For example, burrowing. I don't want the players to be allowed to burrow their Zerg units, but I do want player 8 to. So that's why player 8 has the exception from the default here, researched. There you go. That's tech settings. String editor is pretty pointless. This is just a way, remember I talked about how you can have colored names? Well, this is how you can just edit those like en masse, like all at once. You can also edit like triggers and locations, what their names look like for the colors. I don't use it very much, but it could be useful if you don't want to have to actually click in to find your unit. But personally, I think it's easier just to do it that way. Sound editor, if you want any kind of sound in your game. Of course, all the base sounds are going to be there, but for example, I have a custom 2.5-minute music song that plays in the background, custom background music. So that's what this is, and this is a sort of Hans Zimmer-esque sort of foreboding sound that plays when a boss appears, since it's called Boss Appears. So I have 2 custom sounds in here. So these do play when I tell the map to do so. How do I tell the map to do so? That's triggers. So advanced, nothing really here. I can update or something. That probably doesn't even work. Just ignore that. It's going to be a little bit easier if we talk about mission briefing first. So the mission briefing is what shows when you first start the map and everyone is in the briefing room. And in the campaign, usually that's like the story, the introduction of the level. You have like different characters talking to each other. So you can definitely do that. I really went for a very, very basic briefing, which just shows Alexei Stukov, aka the WA veteran unit. This just show portrait. There's 4 slots where it can show a picture. Speaking animation is just like showing the portrait talking, because it's not just a picture, it's actually a video, and you can show him talking instead of just breathing and nodding. And how long you want to do it for, and then how usually you want to line up your text to do that as well. Here he says, "Hail, noble warrior, join us in the fight, go fight," etc. And it also plays the theme song for the player, and set mission objectives for the player. So here it tells them that they can level up their unit to level 2 and level 3, and how many minerals it costs to do that. There's 3 warp crates around the map. If everyone's dead at once, you lose. So victory and defeat conditions are usually something you want to put in here. Destroy all bosses, spires, cerebrates, and overminds. So the basic information they would need to know, put that in there. Then when they're actually playing in the game, they can click their settings, options, mission objectives, and they can see those anytime they want. So that's nice. It's nice, there's something that's always accessible. They don't have to do anything to access it except click the button, which is quite nice. So that's mission briefing. Okay, how about triggers? Well, triggers are kind of what makes a map come to life. Everything in here is a condition that if it's met, well, it's going to do something. So let's say this one. This is a pretty easy one, right? How do triggers work? Well, you click which player you want the trigger to work for. Now, this is kind of dubious. In a lot of cases, it doesn't matter what you put here. I'll explain that a little bit later. Right now, I'm just showing basic idea of what a trigger is. Conditions. This is what has to happen. So you can say, oh, they have to get this many minerals. That's what accumulate is. Elapsed time. You have to be, 5 minutes to have passed once they started playing. Deaths. They have to have had at least 5 guys of theirs die, etc. Always just means right from the get-go. Just no matter what. It will always trigger. What does it do? Well, it sets the hit points, the HP, for all their buildings, all their men, to 100% at heal 1. Owned by current player. Current player means whoever is selected here. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that means whoever fulfills these conditions, it's gonna do this. So it doesn't matter who. Any of these guys is basically what these mean. Also sets their shield points and their energy points to 100%. And preserve trigger, very important. That makes the trigger keep happening as long as the conditions are met. Since the condition is always met. Therefore, this will always happen, no matter what. As long as they're playing the map, it's going to happen. Comment is just like labeling like the name of it. Really nice, because if you don't, let's delete this. Whoa, now it looks like a total mess. Let's say all these, look how many triggers there are here. If all these didn't have a comment, it would be even more impossible to navigate than it already is. So you always want to comment all of your triggers. Some guys will even make fake triggers that don't say anything, but just have a comment. Like, let's say, they'll put something like that, heal triggers in. And then it'll be like a heading, and then they'll put the relevant triggers underneath it. So it makes it a little bit easier to navigate through a bunch of triggers. Honestly, I probably should do that, but I actually haven't done it this time. So heal 1 is what that's called. Heal 2 is for heal 2. Now the one thing you'll see is owned by current player at heal 1 to 100%. At heal 1. What does that mean? Well, locations are a key part of triggers. They are basically boxes you drag on the map, and they are just that. They're locations. So it's going to heal everyone inside this box. That's what the heal 1 trigger does. Heal 2 heals everyone inside this box. So you can see I've actually kind of made the terrain, this diamond, sort of be the heal. So the idea is, as long as you're on this diamond, so because the players can't see the locations. These are invisible to players. You can only see that in the map editor. So they're invisible, so how do they know where to go to heal? Well, they can very clearly see this diamond-shaped area. That's the heal. And you can see I've even made it bigger than that diamond, because better that than the player steps to this very edge of the diamond, and let's say I tried to make this, and then they walk over here, and they're not getting healed, and they die. They're going to be mad, and kind of justifiably, because it looks like this is supposed to be the heal. So I err on the side of extra heal area, because over here is kind of a heal too. That's fine, whatever. So that's kind of what triggers do. Triggers are what make the map actually function. Otherwise, it's just a lot of terrain, and the player, if they have a unit, can just wander through it. If they don't, it's a lot of terrain for them to look at, and they can't even see this stuff, so it's nothing. The map is nothing without triggers. A custom map, anyway. Regular StarCraft free-for-all, melees, etc., top versus bottom, those are playable without triggers. Those are regular StarCraft. That's not custom maps. Custom maps equals triggers, basically. Okay, so next, let's see. Let me open up my list here. Okay, so I kind of showed you around. So types of maps. So there's a lot of different types of maps you can probably play. Go on StarCraft, go on Battle.net, go online, try some out. You'll probably get yelled at for not knowing how they work because everyone's still playing the game, is like 35 and has been playing it for 20 years and knows everything. But that aside, play with WA and we won't yell at you because we're cool, so you can always do that. But we can show you lots of different types of maps. RPGs are a more beginner-friendly type of map usually. Some of them are quite hard, and some of them, if you die, it's over, which can be a huge bummer. So do keep that in mind depending on the map. I have made this a particularly beginner-friendly kind of map because I have triggers set up so that if you die, you go back here to Valhalla, and you have to kill a pylon. Takes maybe 40 seconds, 30 seconds. Once you do, you respawn. You can select a hero again over here. So if you're level 1, no harm, no foul. You're fine. The problem is, though, if you've leveled your hero all the way up to level 3 and you die, uh-oh, now you're back at level 1. So it is a bummer, but at least you're not left dying accidentally and having to sit there watching everybody else have fun the rest of the map, which is really, really lame. That's why I have it set up that way. So RPG is usually a standard, just kind of like any kind of RPG you'd play on the computer or console. You have a character, maybe you pick a character and you go through a story or explore a map, go on an adventure. As you kill units, you get money or experience, you get stronger, you level up, you progress, you eventually kill some final boss and you win. In particular, Æsir Special Forces is sort of like a certain genre of RPG in StarCraft, an old school one, called Special Forces. What is Special Forces? Well, usually it consists of this, a heal area, a XP area, where here, every time you kill these guys, you get money. You go over here, it automatically converts your money into minerals. That's how it works. You spend your minerals on, in this case, leveling up your unit to a higher level guy. Actually, you do that here. So the Firebat evolves into a regular Marine, and that guy evolves into Jim Raynor, the Hero Marine, or Sanctifico, as I have called him in the map. You can also spend minerals to upgrade your weapons and armor for your specific unit, which I have over here. Everyone has every type of upgrade building because everyone can pick any of these guys. Protoss ground, Zerg ground, Terran ground, or Terran vehicle. That's why I need to make sure they have all these and make sure they have the extra buildings because most upgrades require a certain building to get to level 2 or level 3. Terran, they require a science facility. That's why they have that. Protoss requires the Cybernetics Core and the Templar Archives here. That's why they have that. Zerg requires the Hive. That's why they have that. So do make sure that you give players the buildings they need. Even if you set the max upgrades to 255, that doesn't matter if they can't even get to level 2 because you didn't give them the buildings that they were supposed to have. Okay. Oh, side note. Players will definitely try to lift these buildings up, the Terran buildings, and run them all over the map because it's funny. So don't let them do that. Make a trigger that says, let's find my trigger for it. I was just looking at this. I think it's right after here. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, no flying buildings. So what did I make a trigger here? If they don't have Asgard Armory, which is one of these, then move all of the Asgard Armory they own from anywhere back here and tell them no flying buildings. So what does that mean? Well, I have this location here, and if it doesn't detect they have an upgrade building here, why would that be? Because they lifted it off and they flew it over here. It instantly moves it back here. So I don't let them goof off with their stupid flying buildings. That's how that works. So that's important to do. Okay, and let's see. Kind of lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, talking about just general genres. So RPGs. There's also other kinds like Abound, for example. I haven't really made those. Those can be difficult to make. But it's sort of like a very complex labyrinthine obstacle course where if you control one little unit and if you step in the wrong spot, you die, it's over. Very difficult. Some players like those as defense maps, so basically function like a tower defense type of games. where basically you have to construct a defense, and there's just waves of enemies that keep coming, and then you can gradually build more defensive structures or upgrade them or build new types of structures as the waves get more and more fearsome and hard to take down. There's different types of kind of PvP maps like Diplomacy, where you kind of build up a country and you have lots of different structures and units that are produced by the country. It's sort of like a Risk, like board game Risk kind of thing. There's Lord of the Rings style maps like that. There's Helm's Deep. There's lots of maps that reenact famous movie scenes and stuff. Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings, where you have one guy controls Aragorn, one guy controls Legolas, one guy controls all of Rohan, one guy controls all the elves. They have like the map set up, terrain, so it looks like Helm's Deep. Then you have two guys controlling the Uruk-hai, and they try to take down all of the men and elves, etc. Lots more custom maps than that, but those are a few ideas for you. You can really make anything at all. To the point that, for example, MOBAs like League of Legends originated as actually Warcraft 3 custom maps. Warcraft 3 has a real good custom editor too. It came out a few years after StarCraft, so it's actually a little better, most people would say. But StarCraft is just fine. But a whole genre of games has arisen just from a custom map. So it gives you an idea how much you can do with that. And of course, Blizzard, in response, has now written it in that anything you make in the Warcraft map editor belongs to Blizzard. It's their intellectual property. So no more of your creative ideas making you any money. They are now all Blizzard's. Enjoy. That said, that's not true for SCM Draft 2. You can make whatever you want, and then you can go make a game off of it or something. So, yeah, back to SCM Draft 2, different types of maps. Generally, most of my maps are kind of RPG-style maps. I've made a few. I consider myself a pretty experienced map maker. I've been making maps for about 15 years. I wouldn't say I'm a master. There's some things I don't know how to do, but most every regular kind of map thing, I have a pretty good idea how to do it. A lot of times, there's multiple ways to do the same thing, so you got to keep that in mind. Sometimes they have pros and cons. Sometimes it's just personal preference. So you might look up how to do something, and a guy might say to do it a certain way. That might not be the only way to do it. Okay, so let's get started. Let's look at this left side of the map here. Pretty important here. So terrain. This is how you're going to make the map look more than just a blank canvas. So remember how we looked at map dimensions here? You can pick what kind of world you want and then pick this. This is basically your background, your canvas. So I had magma. So this map started off as all this, all magma. I had to paint everything on there. That's what making terrain is. It's painting. Look at this. I put some dirt. Cool. Okay, let's put some shale. There we go. Cool. How about some lava? Whoa. Okay. Cool. So that's what you do. You know, you just paint it, and you try to make it look good. I mean, I'll acknowledge the terrain in this map is not great. It's a little random. This is kind of blocky, not great. But keep in mind the player is zoomed in right here, so it's a little harder to see that the terrain is not fantastic. But one advantage of this, the isometric style terrain, you see it says up here, isometrical. When you're on the terrain, making terrain, you can select rectangular, and then you can do this. Oh, okay. So you can make some kind of cool stuff like that, but it doesn't look very natural. It looks very jagged, so keep that in mind. You might want that for certain things. You might not. You can even make a giant. You can do this. Whoa. You know? So a lot of options there. Kind of anything you would want to do. The one thing to keep in mind is, of course, I showed you earlier doodads, so let's move on to that. I talked about how... Oh, no, I don't want high doodad. I want cliff. So keep in mind you're making terrain if you want to place doodads, some of them like this, especially, yeah. Oh no, that's not what I want. Where's the, well, I'll just show you. Okay, this right here, this is a ramp. Now you got to be careful because you're going to want ramps. Otherwise, there's no way for people to get up to these elevated terrain. So you're going to want to be a ramp. See, there's one ramp there. And there's a ramp off over here. So if you want to place those, you do want to make sure that people can, that they are placeable. So think about that. If you're making an elevated area that you want people to get to, you're going to need ramps. Unless you have some kind of special trigger where if they walk on a little area here, it teleports them up here. You could do that, but ramps are the very straightforward way to do it. So there's lots of ramps all over this place. Another ramp there. And another ramp here. Etc. So that's the number one thing you're going to do with doodads. Other than that, generally something doodads do is just make the map look cooler. You can probably, let's see if there's something vaguely interesting or any of the, yeah, there you go, like a big tree thing. Wow, that looks cool. Makes the map look a lot less plain, so you want to add that kind of stuff. But sometimes that might be something you do late. Usually, you're going to make the terrain first in your map. But you can always go back and edit it. Sometimes you'll change it, you know. You always want to leave some space. If you're making an RPG, for example, I need to have space up here. I have the difficulty select here. I have the Afterlife, Valhalla here. I have Asgard, the home base here, where they can select different things, like look up information about their character, look up information about the bosses, look up information about Clan WA, destroy the secret weapon they have, open the portal room. I need space for the portal room over here, where they can portal to these different locations on the map once they've discovered them. Character select, I have to have room for that. The upgrade area, room for that. Here, where they can give minerals to their allies. Here, where they can turn the music on and off. What about down here? All these settings, these are all timers. This stores game settings. Make sure you have space for all this stuff. It's really annoying if you make a really complicated terrain design and then you realize, oh, I need a bunch of space for extra stuff. So try to keep that in mind at the start and leave some space for supplementary things that you might need. Yeah, doodads, just pretty up the map. Good idea. Actually, I don't know that I've really placed any doodads here. Oh, actually, I see one there. So clearly I did place some. The one thing you'll want to keep in mind is like this one, for example, a lot of these kind of tree sort of things, players can't walk through them. So you don't want to clog up the pathways. Like, especially one of these guys turns into a siege tank. That is a big unit. You don't want the siege tank to be blocked in. I mean, siege tanks are already difficult enough to navigate with. Goliath, the Goliath AI is atrocious. You want to make things harder than it already is with this 25-year-old game. So try not to block pathways or stuff. Try to make them more out of the way like this. They're walking on the map. They walk by here. This stuff they can't walk through, but they can walk by it. There's still a decent-sized pathway here. That's what you want to do with doodads, generally speaking. Okay, locations. Well, I kind of described already what these are. They are locations. So what's the purpose? Well, I put these on beacons. So this is a location for... that's one thing you want to be careful with, dude. If you're on the location layer, anytime you click, it will make a location. Even if you click one little pixel, it'll make a 1-pixel location. I've done that several times. And you want to be careful because there's a max. You can only have 255 locations at once. And if you hit that limit and start making more, it will just start automatically deleting your original locations. You do not want that to happen. It's a nightmare. As a reminder, please do continually make new versions saved with separate names, 1.4 for example here, of your map, just in case you do that, and then you can access the previous version where you haven't messed up your map yet. So this is your arrival, difficulty select arrival here. So why is this here? I use the term arrival for, let's say they walk over here, this is the help. It tells them information. It says that difficulty affects the boss starting HP when they fight bosses, and it affects how difficult all the waves of enemies are, what kind of enemies spawn. If they pick hard, some harder enemies spawn right from the get-go. Once they walk in that beacon, it teleports them back here. Why? Because it works multiple times. So you want to make sure that beacons have a sort of home area. So a better example is here in Asgard. So let's say they walk on Asgard help here. This tells them what all the beacons do. Great, right? But you don't want them to let their unit just sit here because it's preserve trigger. Remember what preserve trigger does? That makes the trigger keep activating as long as the condition is met. If the condition is to have a guy here and you don't move their guy off, then it's just going to spam them with messages repeatedly. It's going to send the same message over and over and over again, flooding the chat. You don't want that at all. So you want to make sure that when they move their guy here, you have another location. Like I said, I like to call it a rival for me. I don't know if that makes that much sense. It makes sense to me. You can call it whatever you want. I do recommend calling your locations logical things. I open up a lot of maps made by 7-year-olds where all the locations are just like with a bunch of random keys, and it's like, let's say you close the map for a month and you open it up again, you're going to have no idea what any of those locations mean. You want to be able to open up the map and logically see what's happening. What if somebody else helps you with the map and they open it up and they're like, what am I even looking at? You're going to spend 5 hours explaining what all the locations are because you named them all gibberish. So you don't want to do that either. Try to name them semi-logical things. So Asgard help here. You step on here and it moves the guy back here after sending the message explaining what all the beacons do. So that's what those locations do. Asgard, for example, you just have a location for the whole area. Keeping in mind, like, if it's on this sort of island or here, it's kind of in this valley. Like this is raised ground. If we go back to terrain, this is all raised. So they have no way to get out here. So that's why I can do something like have Asgard be this location, because I know they can walk into these walls all they want. They're not getting out. So and over here, this is a location. Leave Asgard. It teleports them out here to the frontier, to frontier arrival specifically. When they want to go back to Asgard, they go here. Teleports them to Asgard arrival. So you can see why those locations are important. You need kind of a leave and an arrival location, and in any spot that you use. Any kind of area that you make. Okay, here, yeah, pretty simple. Beacons. Pick your hero. This is the arrival location. Here's the help, etc. What about these? Well, these are where all the waves of enemies that continually attack the base spawn. So let's check out one of these. Find something simple. Where is Great Spire 8? Why is it over there? Something. Okay, yeah. This is very simple. Okay. So here, it's a little hard to see here, but there's a Cerebrit right here. I call it DAG for Cerebrit Dagoth, because that is actually what these are, is Cerebrit Dagoth. Why I didn't just use the regular Cerebrit, I don't know. Whatever. So this is DAG 10, meaning this is the 10th Cerebrit Dagoth that is out on the map. So this location is for that Cerebrit. And this is for the spawns it creates. So every, 1 minute, it creates a Zergling and tells the Zergling to run and go attack him. Okay, cool. Now, why do I need a location here? Because it checks if this Cerebrit is here. So it only spawns a Zergling on a timer every 1 minute or whatever, as long as there's still a Cerebrit here. So that's why you need this location, because it's going to check if that Dagoth is there. And once it's not going to spawn the guys anymore. Same thing here. Great Spire here. Great Spire 1's going to check to make sure that Great Spire is there in order to spawn these guys. It's only going to spawn them as long as it sees there's still a Great Spire there. So if our player characters come in here and kill these, they're going to stop spawning. This is what I call the Gauntlet mechanic, because if you've ever played the arcade game Gauntlet, and there's corresponding StarCraft maps that do the exact same thing, there's lots of like little structures that will spawn enemies continually, a lot of them, until you blow up the structure. So eventually, you have to stop just hitting the guys and blow up the structure to stop the spawns, or else this is going to flood the whole map. So that's the same mechanic here. It's something that keeps spawning guys until you blow up the structure. Okay. All right, let's look at my notes here. Units. Well, I've kind of shown you everything you need to know about units, but the main thing with units is, first of all, this is usually the go-to layer, or whatever you want to call it, level that you want to be on. You know, the terrain level, you're going to be placing stuff. Like I said, the location level is a minefield, because if I accidentally click here, it's going to make a location, and I don't want that. The units level is great, because if I accidentally click, it doesn't do anything. Worst case scenario, what? I just selected a bunch of guys. Let's just click again. They're unselected. Cool. Very easy to avoid doing any significant damage to your map with accidentally clicking. So the units level is usually where you want to be if you're just looking around. What can you do in the units level? The most important thing is you can select guys, and you can right-click and click properties here. What can you do? You can change who owns them. You can change their starting life. You can change if they're invincible or not. That's really important. You can make them hallucinated. You can make them burrowed. You can do whatever you want. Why can't I burrow? Because I have a Mutalisk selected and a Broodling selected. So you have to make sure that they are units that are allowed to be burrowed. Here we go. Oh, see? Now they're burrowed. Let's have them not be burrowed. Cool. So you can change properties. For example, here, these are just guys representing which hero you're selecting. I want these to be invincible. Why? Because if by some miracle an enemy gets over here, even though I have triggers set up to stop them from doing that, I want to make sure that they don't just kill these example characters, and then all of a sudden these beacons are meaningless to the player, because they have no idea which one is which. Hence why I have them be invincible. Same deal. These structures tell the players what these beacons do. They need to be invincible. They need to not be able to be blown up. In addition, just a side note, I have most of these guys set up as owned by player 11. So players 9, 10, 11, 12 are usually neutral players. They're non-existent players. So what that means is they're not even controlled by a computer, much less a human. So they don't do anything. If I made these controlled by player 7, the player's ally, then if an enemy somehow came over here, oh, Mutalisk or Overlord wandered over here. Oh, now this stupid Dragoon is going to run over here and start trying to shoot it, and then when he doesn't, he's just going to sit here. And now it looks terrible and weird because the units are not in the right spots. These guys are going to run over there too and try to shoot the air unit. What if Overlord drops the ground unit here? Okay, now all these ground guys are going to run over and start hitting it. You don't want these guys to move. So rather than trying to do some weird thing like making a trigger that tells them not to move, just make them owned by player 11. Guarantees player 11 doesn't exist, so they're just going to sit here mindlessly, ignoring everything, never moving ever. It's great. So that's what you want for any kind of neutral unit. As an example, I have these minerals owned by player 12, a neutral. Now, it doesn't really matter. I could make these owned by player 8, but the one thing it will do is on the minimap for the player, it shows colors corresponding to who owns what. So the minerals will stand out here from the yellow of player 8. It's a small detail, but that gives some example of why ownership might matter. But for the most part, what you're going to do with units is just put whatever you want in your map. So I placed all these sunken colonies, all these layers, etc., these different structures around the map. That's why these are there. It's kind of your starting map. Now, you might not want hardly anything on the map to start with, depending on what kind of map you're making. You might want everything to be created by triggers. Keep in mind, you can have triggers that create units, that remove units, that move units around. So you can do just about everything you need with triggers. The one thing you might want to do is if you want like buildings, like defenses or stuff already placed, it's a little easier just to place them because then you don't have to worry about making 500 triggers to place different sunken colonies around the map. Just put them there, unless there's some reason that you can't do that. That's not a little doodad, by the way. It's that little crystal thing right there, just as an example. So yeah, you can place different stuff around the map. One important thing is, so I have a trigger here for player 8 called Micamust AI. What does it do? Execute AI script expansion Zerg campaign insane at =1. This is a specific thing. So for this map, I want the enemy computer to actually play the game, not just sit there and just don't issue any commands so their units or do anything. I want them to actually play. How do you do that? Well, you set the AI to something like what I said, Zerg campaign or Terran campaign or Protoss campaign something, and it'll actually do stuff. Zerg campaign insane just means it will do more things than a non-insane one would do. And this shouldn't be here. Let's move that there. Okay, so what happens? Well, =1, you have to make sure you have a location that is a base, which means they have some kind of central structure, like a hive here, or a command center, or a nexus, or a hatchery, or whatever, and some builders. So some drones is what I have, and minerals for them to gather from. These conditions all have to be met. You need a location with a building, with minerals, with builders. All those have to be met, otherwise, even though you have it telling it to execute the AI script doesn't work because it doesn't understand what's happening. It says, where's my builders, where's my minerals, what is this, I don't understand. So you have to have those basic conditions met and have it set to run the script at that location. Then it will actually play the game, and it will do lots of weird stuff, some of which you might not want, like it'll send 20 overlords right here and have them just sit there because it doesn't know what to do with the overlords. That's fine. I mean, there's limitations to StarCraft AI. If you really want to, you can look up on Google how to write your own StarCraft AI and write a really complicated, cool AI. That's exactly what you want to do, but that's extremely difficult and complicated and not something I know how to do, nor is it something I am going to cover. Okay, so that is talking about units, locations. You can place minerals and resources and stuff too. That's under neutral. You can place special little things like these little mineral things, power-ups. You can see that I've used those as kind of labels here. Like this says join clan WA. This says like hero information. This says like boss information. which again you do by going into unit settings. You can change what those are called. Wow, boss help, hero information, Asgard help, etc. Quite cool. Okay. So there's your units, unit sprites. Really not something you need. This is just, it's a visual, but it's not actually there. So if you just want the appearance of a certain unit, you can do that, and you can do some weird effects like hallucination deaths. You can make some smoke or something if you want to do that. That's sort of something I did with these dark swarms. Those are an effect, basically. They don't actually work, just to make it look more demonic. Okay, well, now you know your way around SCM Draft 2. You know what everything does, right? But what about triggers? That's kind of the most difficult thing here, right? Make sure I'm not jumping ahead. Yes, okay, triggers. So, as I explained, triggers are what make a custom map a custom map. Give me a second here. So I explained the heal trigger. Let's look at that one more time, though. So let's start with players. So generally, when does players matter? Well, it matters if, for example, so you have players, you have conditions, which is what is going to trigger the trigger. So always means it's always going to happen. Again, you can have it, they have to get a certain number of minerals. They have to bring a guy to some certain spot, a location. Again, location, a location you've made. They have to own a certain number of people. They have to have a certain number of deaths. They have to have a certain amount of time has passed in the scenario. Any of that stuff. You can have multiple conditions. You usually will. But in this case, it's always. So it's always going to happen. Preserve trigger makes the trigger just keep happening as long as the condition is met. It just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. And what does it do? Lots of things you can do. One thing you can do is display text message. Send text to somebody. Let's find an example of that. Here we go. About WA text. So this only works for players 1 through 6. Those are the human characters, remember. The condition is current player brings at least 1 men to About WA. What's About WA? Let's look at locations. Right here. About WA. So if they bring a guy here, 1 men means any unit, doesn't matter. We often want that in maps like this, where a player could control any of these and any of their level 2 or level 3 counterparts. So they could have one of 24 different units. Well, rather than having to make a trigger for every single one of those, yeah, I think I'm just going to say brings 1 men. Then it will work for any of them. It doesn't matter. There's some cases where you do want to make it specific to the guy they have, but we'll probably go over those later. It's not very common. So current player, what is that? Well, it's probably your best friend in the case of selecting what player you want. You can select force. Remember those? I talked about how you have different teams in your map. Scenario forces. We have Force 1 here, Force 2, Force 3. Those are the teams. Team 1, this is all the humans. Team 2, this is their ally. Team 3, this is their enemy. So you can make a trigger for forces, but I will just caution you right now, you usually don't want to make triggers for forces because it does a lot of weird stuff. It's usually not what you want. 9 times out of 10, it's not what you want. Current player means it will only work for whatever player meets the conditions. So for whatever player triggers it. So it can trigger for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If they all do it right at the same time, it'll trigger for all of them. If only 1 and 4 do it, it'll only trigger for 1 and 4. If only player 1 does it, it'll only trigger for player 1. It'll trigger for whoever does it. So current player means just whoever we're looking at right now out of these options. What has happened? He has to bring 1 guy to About WA, that location I showed you. What does it do then? It moves all men at that About WA spot to Asgard arrival. So this is why we move the guy back here. Why do we do that? So this is a rule that I talked about in the lecture that I messed up, that I had to redo now, is anytime you have a repeatable trigger, so a trigger that has preserved trigger here, that's going to keep happening, you almost always want to make sure that whatever the conditions are only going to be met once. How do you do that? Well, you need an action that is going to cancel out the condition. That's going to make sure the condition is no longer met. So the trigger is essentially going to stop itself from triggering again. So the condition is having a guy here. So what action do we need? We need an action that gets that guy off of there. That's exactly what this does. It moves that guy from here to here to make sure, because otherwise, if we didn't have this, what does it do? Well, it displays them. It tells them what WA is. WA is a clan that was founded, blah, blah, blah. You can check out our Discord, blah, blah, blah. It's just going to spam them with that stupid text like 500,000 times a second because their guy is still here. As long as their guy is here, it's going to keep doing it. We don't want that. We want it to send one nice, clean message, and that's it. And then if they didn't see it, they can bring their guy back, and they can look at it again. It'll trigger again. So that's why we want to make sure, because this is preserved trigger, it can happen more than once, but it's only going to happen once at a time. One time in one given second, for example. So that's why we have bring a guy here, move him back, move him off of there. So you almost always, like 99% of the time, if you have a preserved trigger, a repeatable trigger, make sure that the condition is something that's only going to be met when you want it to be met. So the trigger only triggers once. So make sure you have some way to, cancel it out. There's some other ways to do that. One example is switches. I personally don't like to use these, but you can use them. So you can have a switch, and you can change the name, and then you can make a trigger. And one of the things you can do is set switch. You can clear, you can set a switch. You can set it, you can toggle it. So essentially what a switch is it's just a binary. It's 0 or 1. It's like a light switch, on or off. So you can have a switch that says when somebody does something, the switch goes on. And then since you can have the trigger only trigger when the switch is off, that's a way to make sure it only happens once. But as you can maybe imagine, those are a bit limited. There's only certain things you can do with switches. So personally, I try to avoid using them, and also because they kind of hurt your brain a little bit. They can be a little bit confusing. So I usually like to do what I'll show you next, which is what I might call manual switches, or manual checks, I think might be a good way to put it. So what does that even mean? Well, okay. Let's look at our locations down here in our little secret area. So there's a few different places. First of all, there's a settings area for each player. So player 1 settings. So this is basically storing information. You ever play a game, you open up the menu, and you can change the window size, full screen, change the volume in the game, change the graphic settings, turn subtitles on, all that kind of stuff. That's basically what this is. So there's units that are created or removed here, like these two guys you see here, that represent things that the players have personally set for themselves. This Dark Archon represents, remember how there's custom music in this map that plays automatically? This represents if they want to listen to the custom music. If you're going to put custom music in your map, please add a way to turn it off, because otherwise it's going to annoy the crap out of half the people who just don't want to listen to it. Not everyone's going to like your cool music. So this represents, as long as this Dark Archon is here, it means the player likes the music and they want to listen to it. How do they turn it off? That's what this is. This is turns the music on and off. You can see the Dark Archon is here too. Wow, cool. So they bring the little guy here to this location, turn music on off, and it teleports their guy back here. And what does it do? If the Archon is here, it kills him. And then the music trigger is set to only play music for that player if there's an Archon here. Now let's say they turn the music off and they change their mind. They want it back. Okay? Same thing. They bring the guy back here, and it checks if there's no Archon here, then it's going to make one for him. And now the music is going to check to see if an Archon is there. It's going to find there is an Archon there now, so the music is going to play again. That's how that works with that setting. Same thing here. This probe represents whether they are giving 500 minerals at a time or 2,500. That's what this beacon right here is. It toggles whether they're getting 500 or 2,500. So that's what this probe represents. If the probe is there or not. That's sort of a switch. If you understand what I'm saying, this is a physical manual switch. It's a little bit easier to see visually. I like to work it this way. I'll explain it a little bit also. Another advantage of doing stuff this way. The disadvantage is it takes up space on your map. So it's not all great, but disadvantage. One thing I want to talk about is the music I just mentioned. Over here is a timer. Now you can have manual timers. What is a manual timer? Well, you make a photon cannon or something, and then you have a location here, and you have it make a building. And you set that building's HP to however many seconds or stuff you want, and have the photon cannon kill it. And then you have a trigger that checks if the building is there or not. So let's say this guy, he takes about 2.5 minutes for the photon cannon to kill. If you really want to, you can test it out on the map, or you can look up on the StarCraft wiki the exact attack speed of your photon cannon. You can set the damage for your photon cannon and the HP and make sure it comes out exactly right. But the truth is that StarCraft is a little bit random, and units do not actually attack at the exact same speed all the time. There's very small variations. So I like to add a couple extra seconds. So I think the song is something like 2 minutes 40 seconds. This takes like 2 minutes 44 seconds to kill. That's okay. There's a few seconds of silence between plays of the song before it loops again. That's fine. So this is a timer. This is the music timer. So it's going to blow this up. And then basically, let's check out our music trigger. If I can find it. Here we go. Player 1 music. This is for player 1. So first it checks if they have a music turn. That's that Dark Archon I showed you down there. It checks if they have one. So it's only going to do this trigger, play the music, if they have a Dark Archon there. That's how you can turn it off. And it checks if there's 0 music timers here. So this has to be killed in order for this to trigger. They have to have a Dark Archon, and the music timer has to be killed. Then it's going to play the music. Preserve trigger, right? Now, there's also, if we go over here, restart music timer. So if there's no music timer here, what does it do? It makes a new one. So that's how the timer works, is because once this has been killed, it creates a new timer that takes 2.5 minutes to kill. So that's exactly how the manual timer works. You make triggers that check if there's that trigger only when no timer is there. So when the timer building has been killed, then the trigger goes off. And you have another trigger that creates a new building anytime there's no timer there. Just keep the timer going indefinitely. Now these are shorter timers, like 5-second timers, so it makes buildings with much less HP that die in 5 seconds. There's even an instant timer here, which creates a 1 HP building. So it's going to trigger like once or twice a second, because it's going to constantly get killed. As a side note, make sure all this stuff is invincible, because you don't want your photon cannons blowing up stuff that you don't want them blowing up. Also, just a reminder, if I didn't say it already, shared vision. I don't want these guys to have shared vision even if they're ally player 7, because he's got his photon cannons down here operating the timers. I don't want them to be able to see the timers. That's the magic. I don't want them to see behind the scenes. So do not give shared vision unless you really want them to. Okay, let's talk about one other thing. So, well, we got a few more things, but let's talk about one thing. This is possibly the best, most important thing for an RPG. What's a fundamental part of an RPG? The player kills something, they get some experience, maybe some money. Okay, how do we do that in StarCraft? Well, we do it with the trigger, of course, as you may have guessed. Let's look at an example. Let's say, where's a Hydralisk? Hydra. Kill Hydra money. So for starters, who do we want to be able to earn XP? Well, not the computers. The computers don't need XP. The players. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is who we have it set as. What are the conditions for this to trigger? This is a trigger that's going to give players a special currency called Yarna for killing stuff. Now, there's a different trigger for every single possible unit that they could kill. You're going to need to do that. You also are going to need to make triggers for if they kill multiple at the same time. So this is a trigger for if a guy kills 7 Zerglings at once. Not going to be very often that that happens, but it's a good idea to do just in case they are playing as an Archon or a Firebat and their splash damage kills a bunch of units at the same time. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to look at the Hydra here. Okay, so it's for the human players. Condition. Player 8, that's yellow here, has suffered a death of Snake Demon. That's the name of the Hydra. So first, we're checking to make sure that a Hydra has been killed. In this case, they've suffered a death, so we know one has been killed. We're going to look at current player. That's any one of these guys. If their kill score is at least 350. So you can Google online StarCraft Brood War unit kills scores. And there's a nice guy who's made a table and listed the values for every single unit. Basically, intrinsically in StarCraft, every unit has a number assigned to it, which is its value if you kill it. So if you kill a Hydralisk, it's always worth 350 kills score. This is different from just kills, which is just a number, which is 5 Hydras is 5. 5 Hydras and 5 Zerglings is 10. This is kills score. So it's a cumulative value based on the total number of various types of units they've killed. And every single unit has its own value. Some units have the same value. Firebat's worth 400. Phoenix the Zealot is worth 400. Dark Templar is worth 400. 8 Zerglings is worth 400, etc. So, we're checking, let's say, current player is player 1. Again, this can trigger for anybody at the same time or not at the same time. Current player kill score is 350. That's what you get for killing a Hydra. And player 8 has suffered the death of a Hydra. So a Hydra's been killed, and current player has the kill score you'd get for killing a Hydra. Boy, it sure sounds like this guy killed a Hydra. That's what this trigger's finding out. Okay. So, we know he's killed a Hydralisk. What do we do? First of all, we modify the death count for player 8 and subtract 1. Why do we do that? Because we have that preserve trigger here, and we don't want him to kill 1 Hydra and then get $1 billion. We want him to get the value for killing 1 Hydra. So we got to make sure that the trigger resets itself, that it makes sure that the condition is not continually met until another Hydra has died. So because we have preserve trigger, we have to make sure that we modify the death count and decrease it by 1. Next, we also have to reset the kill count here. The kills score, rather. Kills score is 350, so we want to subtract 350 kill score. I know it says 350 kills. It means 350 scores. Set score is the trigger here. And then we want to modify the score for them and add 200 custom. That's the Yarna, the custom money I talked about earlier. If you want for your own map, you can have this just give them minerals directly. But for special forces, usually what you do is you give them a special kind of money, and then when they come over here to the convert to money location, it automatically converts their money into minerals. Just an added step, it's kind of fun. Forces them to walk back here. I do have a trigger that automatically slowly converts their money into minerals, but it happens instantly if they go over here. And preserve trigger. So that's all you have to do. What this is going to do is anytime any of these guys kills a Hydralisk, it's going to give them 200 of that money. And this is going to work super well, primarily for one reason. What reason is that? Because we have hyper triggers. So normally when you play StarCraft, triggers are only going to go off like once a second. It's pretty slow. It can be pretty bad. Like, remember that heal trigger I showed you? If you had a guy here and you had a bunch of enemies all hitting him at the same time, and he doesn't have much health, he could just die. Even though there's a trigger that says to keep healing him, he's only getting healed like once a second. Oh man, he's going to get blown up really easily, and that feels bad for a player. So that's why you might want hyper triggers. What are hyper triggers? Hyper triggers are a way to trick StarCraft into, instead of checking for a trigger once a second, check 12 times a second. Now that's pretty cool. It's going to be real hard to die if you're getting healed 12 times a second over here, even if a bunch of stuff is hitting you. Hyper triggers are great. How do you do hyper triggers? First of all, you want to make sure that in the trigger, your hyper triggers, you're setting it to a certain player, not a human, who does not have a lot of triggers. Why? Don't ask. It's just the way it has to be done. This is even optional. I could actually move these somewhere else. So generally, you want almost no other triggers. And make sure the hyper triggers are at the bottom, below the other triggers. What do they do? Hyper trigger, usually you want 3 to 4 copies of these, and each one is just player 7. The condition is just always, and the action is wait for 0 milliseconds. So that's in here. If you went, well, let's delete it. New, oops, not victory. Wait for 0. Cool. And preserve trigger. The comment is just labeling it as hyper trigger 1. So this is, you can see the maximum number of actions is 64. 16 is the maximum number of conditions. By the way, this is just like showing the actual code. I wouldn't bother looking at that. 62 copies of waiting for 0 milliseconds times 4, 248 copies of wait for 0 milliseconds. So what does that do? Well, Basically, every time a wait command is issued, it makes StarCraft look and check all of the other triggers, all this stuff. Checks them all. So when you have all of these, it makes it check way more than it normally would. The wait commands are forcing it to check everything. So you can make everything trigger 12 times faster. Awesome. Almost always want that. If you don't want it, you can do what I did here, which is I made a timer. Remember those timers I showed you earlier? Make a 1 HP building here and a photon cannon and have it blow up, and then have stuff happen only when that timer isn't there. So you could basically have something happen like once or twice a second. Even though you have hyper triggers, it's going to go back to that. So if you want something to not happen at hyper trigger speed, because remember, hyper triggers are going to make every trigger that fast. So if you want something to happen slower for whatever reason, make a little timer here, a little quick timer, instant timer I call it. Use that. Okay. Now you have your hyper triggers set up. Cool. I talked about how that is going to make stuff like healing happen instantaneously. Well, let's talk about why would you not want your hyper trigger, would not want something to trigger that fast. Here's an example. One thing you can do with locations that's really cool is you can actually move a location while the game is happening. So let's take a look at one of those. Let's say Warrior. So this is for player 1. And this is instant timers. This is using that instant timer, right? It's triggering only when there's no instant timer at that location. So remember that instant timer location? This is constantly killing this, and there's a trigger that just keeps making a new one every time it dies. So essentially what you have is a timer that's going off once or twice a second. Okay. Let's go back. We'll find a different one. We'll do Euler. Okay. So every time that timer goes off, and this trigger only happens if the current player, in this case player 1, commands at least one Euler. So this is only happening when Euler is the unit they have. They can only have one hero at a time in this game. So that's why this works. Even though there's all these other ones, depending on which hero they have, they can only have one at a time. So only one of these will be active ever at once. So when the timer goes off, and assuming they have a Euler, that's when this happens. Preserve trigger, it's going to keep happening. It's going to center location. Move location is what we want. Move location, that action. It's going to move the location called player 1 character onto the Euler, owned by player 1, anywhere. So what that means is that as every time that timer goes off, assuming player 1 owns a Euler, it's going to keep moving this location onto him. Now, why would I not want it to do that instantaneously? Not instantaneously, but 12 times a second. Why do I only want it to happen once or twice a second? Here's the reason. Because that location does a couple of things. One thing it does, they have an observer that teleports to that location all the time. That allows them to see cloaked and burrowed enemies and attack them. That's really nice. What about over here? This is a secret. There's a couple secrets around the map that give them a secret, super powerful unit. If I can find him. This guy gives them a special battlecruiser that's invincible, that follows them around everywhere because it keeps teleporting to whatever that location is. That player 1 location, character location, it keeps teleporting the observer and the battlecruiser to that location. Okay, here's the problem. If I'm trying to walk around with my little marine, and I have a location that keeps moving 12 times a second on top of me, there's an observer and a battlecruiser that keep teleporting on top of me 12 times a second. It looks very chaotic and distracting, and it gets difficult to concentrate and to see what's happening on the screen because the battlecruiser is just going all over the place all the time. Even worse, whenever the battlecruiser is trying to attack, the battlecruiser attack animation takes a little while. So if it's constantly being moved 12 times a second, it doesn't even get a chance to attack. So you don't want that. It actually would make the battlecruiser not even work. It would make it completely useless. So I want to make sure that that location is only moved once or twice a second. Therefore, the battlecruiser is only teleported once or twice a second, which makes sure that the battlecruiser is going to actually function and attack. So there's an example of something that I don't want operating at that hyper trigger speed. I want it operating at my nice little instant 1 HP timer speed here. All right. Okay, so let's see one or two other triggers that might be handy. Alliances, pretty standard. Always for players 1 through 6. Set player 8 to an enemy. Set player 11 to an ally. That's that neutral guy that has like the beacons and stuff, and the player character, like the examples there and stuff. Doesn't really matter because they're invincible, so you couldn't attack them anyway, but I want the players to know it should be an ally, right? I mean, it's like consider it like a statue of the character they're selecting. It shouldn't be an enemy, it should be an ally. Just logically, just a small thing, doesn't matter much. I want them to set Force 1 to ally, which means that's going to set one another to ally, because Force 1 is going to mean everybody in Force 1. I will explain later why you usually don't want to use Force 1 as the player. You don't want to do this, usually. Sometimes. I'll show you when to do it and when not to. So set player 7 to ally. So that's setting the bunker here. Setting this guy to ally. Good, we want to do that. Set player 8 to enemy. We want to set the demons to an enemy, of course. And we want to turn on shared division with one another automatically. We want to do that. Now, I don't think I actually need to do that because this is already ticked. But here's the problem. Some smart aleck is going to boot into the game, and they're going to get their hero, and they're going to open up their diplomacy settings, and they're going to turn all their allies off. They're going to turn off shared division, they're going to turn off ally, and they're going to start blowing them away because it's funny. You don't want them to do that. So when you do this, at hyper trigger speed, 12 times a second, it is constantly turning on shared division and setting all of their allies to allies. So as soon as they try to uncheck that box, it's going to check it right back. So they cannot do that. Again, think of your players. They are going to try to do everything possible to break the map and do silly troll stuff. So try to think of ways to stop them, if at all possible. Okay. Let's talk about that Force 1 thing I was just mentioning. So when would you want to use Force 1? Let's start with when you wouldn't want to do that. So I have a trigger here, if I can ever find it. Where is it? Money, here we go. So every time the players kill a Spire or a Cerebrate, I set this for player 8. So most of your triggers, you're going to probably want them on like a either player 7, the ally computer, or player 8, the enemy computer. Having them on a computer is nice because you can do whatever you want. Helps to organize your triggers a little bit. And you usually only want them on one player. It can be whoever you want, but only one player, because if I have it set to multiple players, then it will trigger one time for each player. Why is that bad? Well, this basically is checking anytime a Cerebrate has been killed, it's going to give 1,000 minerals to all 6 human players. So if I had this set to like this, now it's going to give 1,000 minerals to these players 4 times. No, I don't want that. Each Cerebrate is only worth 1,000. I only want this to happen once. So you might say, well, let's see here. Okay, these guys are all in Force 1, so let's just do Force 1. No. Terrible idea. Why? Because this is going to trigger one time for each of these 6 players, because this is treating it as if you had this selected. So you don't want that, because it's going to, every time this condition is met, it's going to trigger. It's going to trigger 6 times because there's 6 players. It's going to give everyone 6,000 minerals. You don't want to do that. You do not want to do that. So make sure you are careful about using Force 1 for stuff like this. Generally, most triggers, you're only going to want to have one player, unless it's something that you want an individual player to be able to trigger multiple times, or multiple players to be able to trigger at once. Okay, so I have it set to player 8. Every time a Cerebrate's killed, it gives them 1,000 minerals, more or less. I'll go over in a little bit. It's a little more complicated than that. It's the next thing we'll go over. Okay, so when would we want to use Force 1? Well, the biggest reason is when you want a message to go out to all the players at the same time. So what's this? Technically, this could just be always for the condition. This is checking to see if the players have already lost the game. It would be basically, I think it is impossible for them to have lost at the start of the game, but just in case, you never know. So that's the only condition. So basically always, as long as they haven't lost. Force 1, send them this message. Choose map difficulty setting. Why does it send them that? Because it's the start of the game. This is where they start. It's right over here. And they have to pick a difficulty setting. So I want them all to see that message, and I want them all to see it at the same time. So that's fine. Now you might ask, well, how come when it's set to minerals, it triggers 6 times, but when it's set to a text message, it only sends it once to every player? I have no idea. I've heard that StarCraft has very buggy code, and it's amazing that it functions as well as it does, according to the original developers. So I imagine that has something to do with it. But something like this, sure, use Force 1, because I want everyone to see it for sure when the condition is met, and I want them all to see it at the same time. So same thing. Elapsed scenario time. So exactly 45 seconds into the game, what does it do? It tells everybody, upgrade your weapons and armor at the top left of the map. And it sends a bunch of pings to upgrade buildings. This location here. So the minimap will ping, and it'll say, hey, look over here. And it says, upgrade buildings. This is where your upgrade buildings are. Instructional stuff for everybody. Perfect use of Force 1. What else? How about when a spire is killed? Doesn't matter who killed it. I want everyone to know a spire was killed, and I want everyone to know where they got those 500 minerals. So I send this message to everybody. A Mechama spire has been destroyed, plus 500 minerals. But notice, I don't have the actual action that gives them the minerals set to Force 1. Only a message for everybody. So a lot of times what you're going to have is you're going to have multiple sides or copies of the same trigger for different players that are doing different portions or components of it. So Force 1 just has the message component. Player 8 is what I showed you earlier. They have... Where even is it? They have the actual give money trigger. Make sure it only happens once. It's only set to player 8. Even though it's set to player 8, I can still say it's modifying players 1 through 6's minerals here. So don't worry about that. That's why a lot of times it doesn't really matter which player you set here. It's really just organizing things. Sometimes it does. Displaying text messages is an example. That's why I have these set to Force 1 so that it shows them to players 1 through 6 at the same time. Same thing, if they trigger a boss, let's say they walk up to Anaconda. This condition, player 8 has an Anaconda, which means the boss has spawned, okay? It plays the boss thing. I want it to play for everybody at the same time. I want them to know a boss has spawned. Sends this message to everyone at the same time, so they all know a boss has spawned. It pings the map for everybody at the same time, so they know the boss has spawned. This is when you would use Force 1. This is all just messages. That's all this stuff is messages and minimap pings. The only thing I use for Force 1. You notice not a lot of variety here. Not a lot. You want to be real careful what you're using it for. Okay, so here's something interesting. So, and this took me a long time, actually, to devise a system that actually works. But now I know, and I really want to tell everybody about it because it's great. It's a little complex, but it works. So, let's say a player goes over here and they kill this Cerebrit. Well, we don't need the location. They kill this Cerebrit. You can't even see it. Let's look at this. They kill this Cerebrit Dagoth. Okay, what happens? Well, let's start with something I already showed you. Kill Cerebrit. Where is it? I think it's worth quite a bit. Oh, by the way, I have these organized for no reason, but you see how this is worth 2,500? Going by the default StarCraft kill score values. 2,500, 2,200, go down to 1,400, go down to 1,400, go down to 1,350, and so on, going down, going all the way up to 3,800, etc. So here we have the kill Cerebrit trigger. What does this do? So this is a little bit different from the Hydralisk one I showed you. It probably looks the same. Keep in mind, buildings are called raisings, not kills. Why? No reason. That's just how it's set up. So make sure if you're talking about a building, you have the raising score. Otherwise, you're going to have triggers that don't work, and you're not going to understand why. So if you're talking about a building dying, you want to give something to somebody for killing a building, make sure it's set to raisings, not kills. And vice versa. Don't have raisings if you're trying to kill a Hydralisk. It doesn't work. Okay. So we're checking that they suffered 1 death of demonic membrane. That's what the Cerebrit is called. And that their raising score is 2,500, because that's what StarCraft has set the default value for killing a Cerebrit Dagoth. 2,500. Okay. What should I do then? Well, you remember this stuff, right? Subtract that 2,500 raisings and modify the death count. Subtract 1. Preserve trigger. Perfect. Okay. That's going to work, but we want to do something else. Because when they kill these are a major objective. So they get bonus minerals for these. Remember I showed you earlier, they get that 1,000 minerals or whatever for killing the Cerebrit? How do we do that? Well, let's see. We could have it just give the minerals for the player right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Have it say, give minerals. But there's one problem with that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember? So if I have all the minerals here, give minerals to each player, it's going to do it 6 times. Again, why? I don't know. That's how it's set up. So we want to make sure that the minerals is set to a player 8 trigger, the one I showed you earlier. So what does this trigger do? Well, it creates an explosion at Cache Cerebrit Slain and creates a message queue. These are both units, by the way. Explosion is a battle cruiser. It's called that because I also use it as a visual effect where I create it and kill it instantly, and it makes a big explosion. Looks cool. That's why it's called Explosion. But it has a secondary purpose of serving as a signal that some objective has been killed. This message queue is a Protoss shuttle. It is a trigger also to show that an objective has been killed, but they're used for different purposes. So when this triggers, every time a Cerebrit dies, it creates an explosion and a message queue at Cache Cerebrit Slain. Okay, well, what is Cache Cerebrit Slain? That's another one of these little fancy locations I have down here. So this location is Cache Cerebrit Slain. One thing, make sure if you're using these settings, see these stay put settings? These are telling all those guys to stay where they are. It's telling the explosions and the message queues to stay where they are. All explosions and message queues here, keep moving there. Do not leave. Tell them 12 times a second to stay put, so they're never going to leave. You want to do that? You don't want your settings wandering off and messing up your whole map. You want them to stay put where you put them. Okay, so it's creating a shuttle and a battlecruiser here. So what do those do? Well, let's look at this money trigger we've looked at a bunch of times. Let's look at it one more time. Let's look at the conditions here. What's the condition? The condition is not having a Cerebrit die. The condition is something that resulted from the other trigger that we had set up for giving people money for killing a Cerebrit. It gives them Yarna, but it also creates an explosion here. So this trigger is checking if there's an explosion here. Okay, so it triggers every time there's an explosion here, a battlecruiser here. Firstly, what does it do? Well, it kills the explosion to make sure this doesn't just happen a billion times because we have a preserve trigger. Make sure you want to cancel out the conditions. Trigger has to end itself. And then it gives the money. So basically, that battlecruiser that's created here every time a Cerebrit dies is a signal telling the map to give everyone the money. That's exactly what that battlecruiser is. It's a give money check or give money signal. That's why it's called cache. It's caching however many mineral givings need to happen. How many Cerebrits have been killed? That's what it's caching. Also creates a growing danger, which is a setting down here in game settings. Growing danger is a Protoss scout. What does it do? It represents their progress through the map. Where is it? Here. So it creates one here. Every time there's 15 of them, it kills the 15 and it creates a threat level, a science vessel. So in total, there's all the bosses, all the Cerebrits, all the Overminds, all the Greater Spires, etc. As they progress through, that threat level increases. What is the purpose? Well, the threat level determines what kind of spawns come from these spawn locations. Remember that difficulty at the start? If they pick hard, it creates 2 threat levels at the start here already. So that means it's going to start off spawning some more advanced stuff already, because all these spawn triggers are set up. There's multiple triggers that spawn different things depending on what the threat level is. So as the players advance through the map, that's how the spawns get more and more difficult. New enemies start spawning because the threat level has gone up. Okay, cool. So now we understand that that trigger checks for the explosion in the cache location, and it's going to create a new unit, or excuse me, it's going to give minerals to those guys and create a growing danger every time that happens. But it's killing the explosion when it triggers to make sure it doesn't happen more than once per Cerebrit death. There's the same thing for Greater Spires, Spires, and Overminds that have their own location. Lastly, let's check another thing that we've already seen. Cerebrit money. This is for Force 1, so all it does is send a message to everybody that a demonic membrane has been killed. What does it do? Well, the condition is that there's a message queue, a Protoss shuttle here, which was also created when the Cerebrate died as a signal that the map needs to send a message to everybody that a Cerebrate died. That's the purpose of that shuttle. It's basically a little, reminder saying, hey, tell everyone that the Cerebrate died. So firstly, we kill the shuttle to make sure this doesn't happen a billion times. It doesn't send a billion messages about the Cerebrate dying. It only sends one message per death. So it detects the shuttle is there, which means it needs to send a message. It kills the message to make sure it doesn't send too many. And then it sends a message. Preserve trigger. There you go. So essentially what those are is they are a sort of manual switch, is what I call it. However, they have one advantage. A switch, if we, make a switch, it can be on or off, right? 2 spots. What if there's 6 players on the map, what if they kill 4 Cerebrates at once? How does the switch reckon with that? It turns on and off really fast? Hopefully you're okay. Well, what does this method do? Well, if they kill 4 Cerebrates, it's going to make 4 battlecruisers and 4 shuttles here. And it's going to kill them, and it's going to send 4 messages, and it's going to give the players minerals 4 times. It's going to do everything properly. Even if they kill a bunch of these at the same time, it's still going to work because it allows for multiple queues, message queues, and explosions to be there at once. That's the advantage of my manual cache system. Okay. Let's see. What else can we look at here? We're probably winding down. We've looked at the kills. We've looked at no flying buildings. Let's look at these warp triggers. These are just a nice little thing. So one thing that I do, similar to what I just taught you, is when a boss has been slain. So let's go to a boss area. Let's go to Anaconda. This is Anaconda's area here. Once Anaconda has been spawned, which is triggered by anybody from players 1 through 6 walking here, once he's been killed for the first time, I create a little observer here. Now, what that observer does is it serves as a signal that Anaconda has already been killed. So a lot of triggers are set up to only work once Anaconda has been killed, or only when Anaconda hasn't been killed yet. So that observer serves as a yes or no check to whether Anaconda has been killed. Why would we need that? Well, remember those kill triggers here that give you money for stuff? They modify the death count. So you can't normally use a trigger and say, check if Anaconda has been killed, just use the deaths condition. Check if they've suffered a death of Anaconda. No, because these triggers are going to subtract 1. So that's always going to be 0. Even if they actually have lost the unit, it's always going to be 0. So that's why the observer is there. The observer signals that yes, an Anaconda has been killed 1 time. That's why that's there. So what's the purpose of that? Well, it's just, again, it serves as a check. And then if we go to locations here, let's check out our warps here. So these are little warp gates. These warp you all the way back home. When do they work? Well, right when you walk on them, but there's a little trick to these. So I've set it up so that there's a way to go back the other way. If you enter Asgard and then you go here and you go to the warp area, it takes you over this to this room. And then you can go to any of these to warp to any of these 3 warp gates. But you can only do it once you've already walked there on foot and activated them. Once they pass through this location close by, what does it do? It creates an observer right here, and that serves as a signal that, yes, they have discovered the warp gate. It even sends a message. Remember our Force 1 message thing? What's this? Warp 1 activated. If they bring 1 guy to Warp 1 arrival, create that Eye of Odin there, and show the minimap ping for the current player for all of Force 1 there, and display for them an Æsir portal has been activated. So it notifies them, and once that observer is there, then these will work. So there's triggers set up that only allow these to work once an observer has been created there, which means only once they've been discovered on foot and activated. Let's check those out. So Warp 1 inactive conditions, they bring 1 men to Warp 1 go to. That's this. So they're trying to use Warp 1. That's what they're trying to do. And the other condition is, but there's no Eye of Odin at Warp 1 arrival, at that location. There's no Eye of Odin there. So what does it do? It moves their guy back here. It centers their camera here, center view. That's something you want to do a lot. If a guy's character is ever being moved, then you want to center their view on where it went. Otherwise, they're going to go, where did my guy go? I have no idea. But you do make sure, again, make sure the condition is going to be canceled out by some action, because if you have center view and preserve trigger, it's going to spam center their camera on something and they won't be able to move their camera. Very frustrating. I've had it happen to some bugs in maps. Get that fixed. You do not want that happening to players. It's awful. And then display for the player, that portal is inactive. You got to travel to it on foot to activate it. So basically, because there's no observer there, which means nobody's gotten there, they try to use this, it sends it back, says, nope, no can do. You can't do that. But once they've done it, once there is an observer, that's why there's a second trigger, which is Warp 1, not inactive. They bring a guy to that location, and there is an observer there. Then move the men to the warp location, center their view there. I could have a message that says, like, you've teleported, but it's pretty obvious that you've teleported, so I didn't think that was absolutely necessary. So that's how the Warp 1 trigger works. Hopefully that kind of explains most of this stuff. I mean, most of these triggers are going to be that kind of basic, like that Warp 1 I just showed you, pretty basic kind of trigger. Once you know how that kind of thing works, that's going to get you pretty far. Few more complicated ones, like the cache thing I showed you, the timers, those are going to be really, really handy. The kill one I showed you that gives you money and XP or whatever for killing a unit, super handy for RPGs. That's the bread and butter. You have to have that in an RPG, some variation of that. I think I mentioned that there are some kills, like killing 7 Zerglings at once. I have those just in case somebody splashes, kills a bunch of them at the same time, something like that. Again, with hyper triggers, those kill triggers are triggering 12 times a second, so it's going to be pretty hard for players to mess those up. But if you do have those like 4 Zerglings at once, 7 Zerglings at once triggers, it helps just in case. Okay. So, yeah, most of these triggers are pretty basic stuff. I mean, you walk on here, it gets rid of your civilian, and it creates a Zergling for you over here. You've picked the Zergling. Congratulations. Basic kind of stuff. That's a lot of what this stuff is. And yeah, that's about all I've got. So hopefully that has helped people with the introduction to map making. Yeah, hope you enjoyed.